we're trying to accomplish onboarding patients onto the correct therapy, and then we're trying to drive adherence to get the best possible outcome for that patient. And economically, manufacturers benefit when those things are aligned.
Point of care has to be defined exactly what it is. When the patient is there, when decisions are being made, when my attention is focused on prescribing and making clinical decisions.
What exactly is point-of-care marketing? Point-of-care channels are quickly becoming a must-have in the pharma media mix, but new vendors and bold claims are making it harder for marketers to trust their media investments will actually deliver reach, impact, and brand conversion. In this podcast, Dr. Jeffrey Stahl, who's the Chief Medical Officer and Director of Innovation at DXWeb, and Steve Silvestro, who's the CEO of OptimizeRx, break down what point-of-care actually looks like, why getting it right makes such a big difference, and how it can drive better outcomes for both marketers and physicians. I'm Bella Chakowski. I'm a reporter at MM+M, and this is the MM+M podcast in partnership with OptimizeRx. Let me just start by opening the floor and asking what's happening in the point-of-care landscape right now and what's going on that might be making marketers' jobs harder.
I think broadly what we're hearing in the marketplace is just a confusion or maybe an expansion around the term point of care to points of care, Bella. And, we're thinking about technologies like patient check-in or maybe other technologies that are outside of the clinical workflow of the physicians, which all are beneficial to the overall outcome of the patient, but aren't necessarily the high value impact that you would see at the actual point of prescribe or point of care. And so we're seeing a little bit of cloudiness around that for marketers. And we're having a lot of marketers reach out to us and try to redefine or understand what the actual point of prescribe and point of care definition really means.
I think I can answer that from two perspectives. One is a chief medical officer of DXWeb, and another one is a practicing physician who also teaches. I think we need to be very scientific and very specific in terms of how we define point of care. Point of care meaning not simply that someone can touch me or one of my electronic devices, but actually when messaging, educational messaging is being provided to me when I'm in front of the patient making treatment decisions and I'm about to prescribe. So I think point of care has to be defined exactly what it is. When the patient is there, when decisions are being made, when my attention is focused on prescribing and making clinical decisions. So I think the actual statement of point of care has to be used in a very precise manner.
So now that we've defined it for folks, can you talk a little bit about the dangers I mentioned at the top, the potential pitfalls of failing to narrowly define point of care? How might that sort of detract from, what marketers are trying to do?
Physicians are trained to learn. Physicians are trained to be able to take information, whether it's as advice or as clinical statements. We are trained to listen when we're taking care of the patients, when it's specifically clinically relevant to us, when it's the decision making, when it's part of the decision making process, and when it's going to help the patient. So if we do not specifically define what point of care is and when that messaging is coming in front of the actual licensed prescriber, the impact, the availability to assimilate the information is much reduced, because as doctors, as nurses, as physicians' assistants are in front of the patient, that's when they're open to informational messaging. That's when they're open to understand and to accept. And if it's not being done at that point, I think the impact is very low. And I think it can actually be construed rather than as information, but as noise. And I think that type of noise outside of the clinical scenario and setting really has very little, if any, impact.
I would agree with Jeff. I mean, I sat on the board of the Point of Care Marketing Association for a number of years, and they've done a lot to try to educate marketers and educate the field generally around the value of point of care. I think it has inadvertently, because everyone is so excited about the point of care, expanded the definition of it a little bit and obfuscated a little bit the true value of what I would say is really the point of prescribe, which is what Dr. Stahl is articulating when he's really contemplating a prescribing decision for a very specific patient. That's the most opportune moment to actually communicate with him and get him the information that he needs for the brand relevant patient. And I think making sure that we're clear on that is really important. And that's not to debase or devalue the other types of tactics in a marketing mix that might happen before or maybe during, but not directly involved in a visit or even after a visit. Those things are all valuable. But Jeff said something really critical that I think is important, which is impact. And I think a lot of marketers in the past, were trained to look at clicks, click-throughs, impressions. How many impressions am I going to buy for X number of cents, CPMs? And really what we need to refocus on is what are we trying to accomplish? We're trying to accomplish onboarding patients onto the correct therapy, and then we're trying to drive adherence to get the best possible outcome for that patient. And economically, manufacturers benefit when those things are aligned. If the patient benefits, the manufacturer benefits. And so it really comes back to aligning outcomes and the benefit for the patient with the benefit for the manufacturer, the agency, everybody that's involved in that ecosystem. And I think we really have an opportunity. This is a watershed moment in our industry where we can really start to redefine and evaluate these different types of engagement strategies and make sure that we're giving physicians like Dr. Stahl and others who are engaging with very big patient loads the information that they need in a timely, accurate, and precise manner. It's just a critical piece for us.
Just to add to what Steve said, when the messaging occurs outside the clinical decision moment, it holds much less relevance, and it actually dilutes the impact of that message.
Yeah, I think that's important, and it's not a substitute. And Jeff, you said something that's really important that I want to hone in on. It becomes a distraction. And that's really important for marketers to know, right? As a marketer, you're trying to get the attention of your target person you want to educate and take them on that journey. In this case, we're taking Dr. Stahl on this journey through his own, clinical decisioning. We're taking the patient on the same patient journey. And, I've talked previously at MM+M about, understanding the patient journey, the value of really digging into it, making sure we understand what patients are going through and when they're going to be engaging with specific either physicians or other providers, practitioners, et cetera, and making sure that we're getting the right information to that ecosystem of a care team. And you're hearing it right now from Dr. Stahl. It's the same thing. It's a desire to have the right information at the right time, but not too much information at inappropriate times. He doesn't want to be home with his kids, for example, and start getting messaging on, a cell phone about, a type 2 diabetic patient when he's trying to watch his grandson play football.
Correct. When the message hits correctly, when it's provided in the appropriate milieu within the clinical decision time, it supports physician thinking, and it actually feels to the prescriber, to the doctor, as it is, which is clinical support, which is how physicians, how nurses, how physicians' assistants are trained. Because let's face it, as Steve mentioned, as a doctor, my decision is for the right patient, the right medication. And if that message is being given in the right and appropriate scenario at the right time, it really has significant impact, and it has a very high level of acceptance.
It sounds like you're describing a bit of a synergy. If the messaging is appropriate and it's delivered at the best time, it can really have a powerful impact. Dr. Stahl, I'd love to hear a little bit, and you've talked about this a little bit, but maybe some examples or even some characteristics of really effective point of care marketing. You've experienced things that you've walked away from going, wow, that was what we should be striving for.
I think the best type of engagement is when it is being presented in the appropriate setting for the appropriate patient. I think this is one of the most important evolutions in terms of messaging to physicians, where it's being done, let's call it with or AI support, where the patient, it's an appropriate patient, the diagnosis is relatively clear or purportedly clear. When the person who is going to be writing, who's taking the responsibility of writing the prescription, will accept it and will have significant impact. Because the biggest issue for a physician, for a nurse practitioner, for a physician's assistant, when the decision is being made, it's a process. And the more support that is being given to during that process, the more impact it will be. If the messaging is appropriate to the prescriber, if the message is appropriate to the diagnosis, if the message is appropriate to the demographics of the patient, if the message is appropriate what comes in to the entire armamentarium of the prescriptions that are being written for that specific patient, the impact will be huge because it helps the prescriber, it helps the patient, and that's pretty much what should be done and where the impact lies.
You raised a really important point there too, Dr. Stahl, which is impact. Again, I want to sort of double down on this because a lot of times we, again, as marketers, and I've been at this for 26 years, right? You're moving from a spray and pray type approach where you've got a marketing mix with a plethora of tactics. And of course, you want to try the new things that come out because they may work, they may not work. But you really need to look at the overall impact. And impact is not messages delivered. Impact is scripts written and scripts adhered to and patients that are onboarded. And that
appropriate scripts written for the appropriate patient.
Yeah, of course, right? And so you can't have attribution for inappropriate scripts. Obviously, we know that would be a violation and also not a good measurement. And that's really the success metric. And ultimately what we're trying to do is benefit the patient. And again, when the incentives are aligned and the economics are aligned, everybody benefits in the ecosystem. And so it's, we've got to challenge our way through it. The last 24 months in this space, Bella, has been, I think, really evolutionary. There's really a fast-paced change that's occurring. Certainly we're seeing it with AI as people are adopting agentically the AI, trying to create efficiencies in their own organizations. We've been doing that, as you know, for 36 months or more. I know that Dr. Stahl and his team are doing that over at DXWeb, and they're doing it very, very well. And so we've been forward thinking in that. But those are tools that should enable us to be more effective and not necessarily disrupt the good work that everybody's got going on.
And might I add, Steve, if the messaging is appropriate, doctors can be agentic as well. We will learn that the messaging that's being delivered is not noise. It's not causing prescriber fatigue. So it becomes a tool, if you will. So the messaging that is being delivered by pharma is being acted upon because it's appropriate, because it's intelligent, because the correct patient is being chosen. And again, we can learn. Yeah. And that is part of the process. And because it's within the workflow, the prescribing workflow, the live prescribing workflow, it's going to have significant utility for the prescriber as well as for the patient. Great point.
And there's a bit of an idea kicking around, a perception that EHR, electronic health record marketing, isn't, quote unquote innovative. What do you all think of that? Is that accurate?
We as a company, and this predates me. It may not predate Dr. Stahl, but it predates me. OptimizeRx was really the first company to start EHR marketing a long time ago. In the, right around the time of the Affordable Care Act, we had one client and one EHR, and it was really a pilot with one brand. And it scaled up to some phenomenal relationships, of one of which is our relationship with DXWeb and with Dr. Stahl and his team. But it is the most cutting edge part of marketing that we can possibly have as marketers right now. And all of the other technologies that we hear out there, which are, I would say, EHR adjacent or maybe ride-alongs, things that might show up in an app store, either in an Epic or Cerner, which are hospital-based systems, things that might be check-in technologies or even discharge technologies. Those are all wonderful pieces of the ecosystem that we can use to benefit what we're trying to accomplish of onboarding patients. But the most critical time is in the actual workflow of a Dr. Stahl or whoever that physician is that's engaging with that patient. Because at the end of the day, and this is where pharma has always gotten it right, the Dr. Stahls of the world are the most important people in terms of needing to convince them to write the script. The patient can be totally sold on whatever medication they want. But if someone comes in and tells Dr. Stahl, I have a cardiac issue, I want drug 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If Dr. Stahl just writes the script without doing his diligence in diagnosing the patient and using his cerebral cortex to actually figure out what's going on, it's a huge problem. And nor would he ever do that, right? And no doctor would. That's worth their salt. So I think we need to, sort of reground ourselves in that. And it's about, Bella, having a good marketing mix. You can't be a one-trick pony as a marketer. You have to have a blended marketing mix. But point of care is cutting edge, and particularly around, and Jeff could comment on a lot of the AI work that we're doing, a lot of the massive data set integration into these pieces to be able to not only understand the patient's current situation that we see in the EHR, but what their 5-year outlook was before they got there, their history, understanding what got them to where they are, and understanding where they're headed. And that's a really important piece. Oftentimes in an EHR, because there's a lack of interoperability, the physician might be limited to what they can see in the continuity of care database that's attached to that EHR. But that patient might be seeing 4 or 5 or 6 doctors, and those doctors might be relying on the CD-ROM or some type of data that the patient is walking in and handing Dr. Stahl. It's not a good way to really get after it. So that's where there's a huge opportunity for cutting edge disruption. And we're seeing it. We're seeing companies like DXWeb and others innovate at breakneck speeds and really change the way that the industry is addressing this.
Effective messaging is not necessarily marketing. Effective messaging is educational. It's actionable. It's occurring during the encounter. It's triggered by real data from the EHR by necessity, real data that's being acquired from the patient, real data that's being acquired from the other prescriptions that have been written. We must adhere to a strict definition of what messaging, what in workflow messaging is. It's, as Steve mentioned before, hitting Instagram when I'm looking at my grandson's pictures, from school, really is not effective because A, I'm not open to it. B, I'm not in front of the patient. C, it's not being driven by the summation of information within the workflow, driven by the AI that we and other people that we have done excellently and our competitors are trying to catch up with. But I would tell you, effective marketing is effective educational messaging for the appropriate patient within the scenario workflow. Doctors, prescribers are very open, extremely open, as a matter of fact, to important and timely information that impacts correctly for that specific patient at that time and can have a massive positive impact on the patient care as well as the prescribing workflow.
We've hit on a lot of topics here, a lot of questions that folks might have. If we could just leave people with some takeaways, what advice would you give to help marketers feel more confident in beginning to invest in or investing more heavily in point of care?
The point of decision influence drives the highest conversion rates because it helps the patients the most and it aids the prescriber in an immeasurable fashion. So whatever does that, whatever in workflow messaging takes place has to take place at that point. Just hitting the physician, hitting the prescriber as they open an email, not in front of a patient, has little influence and little impact, as it should. I'm not thinking about patient A when I'm in front of patient B answering an email. That's not what happens. As long as the message is appropriate, is timely, is within the workflow, then it's going to be very well accepted because it's useful information to the prescriber.
I would second what Jeff just said. And I would also say I would encourage marketers to ask the tough questions, Bella. I think a lot of times because people love the vernacular point of care, the term point of care, everyone out there in our space is using it and probably inappropriately using it, I would argue. And that's what's sort of clouded or muddied the waters. I would really strongly encourage our marketers, just ask the tough questions. What do you mean when you say point of care? What does that actually mean? Are you integrated into the physician's actual workflow? When Dr. Stahl is making a clinical decision or looking at diagnosis or a prescribing decision, are you digitally conversing with that physician? Yes or no? How do you measure return on investment? How do you measure impact? Those types of things are really critical, I think, for marketers to ask, because in today's world where unfortunately so many have adopted the term point of care, and you want to really just get to the heart of it. Like, what are these technologies doing? They each probably have play an important role in capturing a patient, onboarding them, and getting them compliant with therapy. But those roles are very, very different. And I think what you're hearing from Dr. Stahl is the value of each of those interactions is very, very different.
And if I might add, Steve, I think the most valuable opportunity to engage is when a doctor, a prescriber, and a qualified patient are in the same room.
For sure.
And the real question is, and if someone's providing messaging at a market discount, there's usually a reason for that. Because they're not hitting the appropriate patient. They're not within the actual prescribing workflow. And the impact, the conversion is necessarily going to be quite low. The old saying is you get what you pay for. Sometimes you pay for it, but you're not getting it.
Yeah, that's an important point, right? And again, not to beat the drum, but we have a lot of people selling impressions, and generally speaking, reach and frequency. And, to Dr. Stahl's point, you can claim reach, but if the reach isn't real reach in workflow, it's not really reach. And so you can hit that with as much frequency as you want, but the ability to actually change the physician's behavior is de minimis. And so it's not really a discount if it doesn't actually work. And I think that's what you're hearing Dr. Stahl say loud and clear. It's about conversion. How are you going to convert patients and how are you going to convert physicians and drive forward a really good outcome? So
for the patient, for the physician, for pharma, if it's done appropriately, it's all aligned.
Yeah.
And to use another common figure of speech, quality over quantity, it sounds like.
Super important.
Or high quality, high quantity.
Yeah, well, yeah, you're right. Maybe a little modification on that figure of speech. Thank you both so much for a great conversation. You both provided such unique and well-informed perspectives. I appreciate you taking the time.
Great to chat with you.
Thank you.